The story begins with a cunning criminal named Frank Morris, who was being sent to a high-security prison called Alcatraz. No prisoner had ever dared to escape from there because the prison was surrounded by miles and miles of ocean. So, if anyone even dreamed of escaping, they would be certain to freeze in the icy cold of the Pacific Ocean. This prison was deliberately built in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away. That's why no one has ever returned alive from there. But Frank was famous for escaping from prisons. He had escaped from many prisons before. However, escaping from Alcatraz was almost impossible even for him. As soon as he arrived at the prison, the guard searched Frank and then sent him to his cell, where he was to spend the rest of his life. The next day, during breakfast, Frank met an old inmate named Mars, who had made a pet friend out of a rat. While they were talking, he noticed another inmate named Wolf, who was openly teasing him, but Frank ignored him. Continued his conversation with Mars. A little while later, the warden called him to his office, where the warden threatened him, saying, "Don't even think about escaping from here. Many like you have come and gone, but no one has ever escaped from my prison." However, during this speech by the warden, Frank secretly stole a nail cutter, which seemed like a small thing, but who knew how useful it would be for Frank. After returning to his cell, Frank immediately hid the nail cutter inside the Bible. A little later, during a group shower, Wolf once again approached Frank and started teasing him. But this time, Frank was not in the mood to ignore him, and he grabbed Wolf and started beating him up. This behavior earned him a reputation inside the prison, and after that, all the inmates began to fear him. Soon, the prison's library became Frank's second home, where he met the prison librarian, English. English had also been sentenced to life imprisonment in Alcatraz, which led him to give up hope of ever getting out. He was completely absorbed in books. In fact, both English and Frank loved history books, which led to a strong friendship between them. During this time, Frank met a prisoner named Doc, who was an amazing artist and spent most of his time painting. Doc believed that in a dangerous prison like Alcatraz, anyone could fall into depression. His habit of painting was what had kept him alive so far. Meanwhile, trouble was soon to increase for Frank. One day, when all the prisoners were outside their cells, once again, trouble returned. However, this time he had a weapon with which he wanted to attack Frank. Fortunately, Doc signaled, and Frank used his jacket to block the attack. After that, a fight broke out between them, when the guard tried to stop them. Wolf even thought of attacking the guard, which led to both of them being sent to solitary confinement, where prisoners were kept alone. And no prisoner ever wanted to go there, even in their dreams. Frank had to stay here without any fault, which made him quite angry. Now, 2 weeks later, Frank was released, so March sent a welcome note to Frank through his mouse. After returning, Frank also became friends with his neighbor Charlie, who was brought here for a big robbery sentence. Now, one day, when Warden Sales was inspecting, his eyes fell on a painting he had made, which was in Doc's cell. However, he didn't like the painting at all. After that, he ordered all the paintings made by Doc to be taken out. This decision completely broke Doc because he was surviving in this prison only through his paintings. Frank tried to console Doc many times, saying, "It's okay, brother, it's just a painting," but the disappointment was clear on Doc's face. A few days later, during a shift, Doc, in anger, bit off 3 fingers of the guard. Seeing this, the guard immediately arrested him. On the other hand, Frank was shocked to see all this. Now, in the evening, when Frank was sitting in his cell, his eyes fell on a cockroach coming out of the vent. Seeing this, Frank realized that maybe this vent leads outside, connected to some door. The next morning in the mess, Frank met John and Clarence, 2 brothers he had met in the previous prison. And now here, they started talking about Alcatraz prison, discussing how escaping from this prison is impossible because it has high security 24 hours a day. But during their conversation, the idea of escaping from this prison occurred to Frank for the first time. And now Frank wanted to escape from this prison and make history. That night, after the guard completed his round, Frank used a nail cutter to scrape the cement around the grill of his room. He noticed that due to the old age of the prison walls, the plaster was coming off easily. The next day, during a visit with his wife, Charlie learned that his mother's health had deteriorated significantly, and according to the doctor, she only had a few months left. Hearing this, Charlie also felt the desire to escape from Alcatraz so he could meet his mother one last time. The next morning, during breakfast, Frank shared his plan to escape from the prison with his friends. Here, Due to the moisture from the Pacific Ocean, the prison walls have become quite weak, and taking advantage of this, we can scrape off the cement and remove the ventilation grills. After that, we can reach the pipeline and escape from there. However, their biggest problem was how they would cross the ocean after escaping from the prison. On this, Frank told Crane that since you work in the prison's clothing department, whenever you get a chance, steal some raincoats and bring them to your cell. With all this, I know how to make a life board and life jackets. Now, everyone liked Frank's plan quite a bit, and they all decided to work together on this plan. As night fell, Frank got to work and started scraping the cement off the wall. And this time Charlie was with him, keeping watch outside his cell so that no guard would find out about their plan. Meanwhile, Frank was putting all his effort into the work, although doing this with a small nail cutter was quite difficult, which is why Frank's hands got quite injured. So, the next morning, Frank told everyone about this problem. And he said that if we want to get out of here, we'll need a sharp weapon. Just then, Frank noticed his spoon. Without wasting any time, he rubbed the spoon against his shoe to make it dirty. After that, he called the guard and complained about the spoon being dirty. Along with this, he requested the guard to change the spoon. Luckily, the guard agreed to it. But as soon as they went to change the spoon, John started distracting the guard with his chatter, taking advantage of which Frank slipped an extra spoon into his pocket. A little while later, he went to him and borrowed a coin. Who knew that by combining this coin with a nail cutter, Frank would make a sharp-edged weapon? However, that very night, while Frank was busy scraping the cement, the guard suddenly came by, which Charlie didn't notice. But fortunately, English somehow managed to distract him. Seeing this, Frank immediately stopped digging and returned to his bed. They got away this time, but now Frank realized that he couldn't fully trust Charlie. For the next few days, they continued digging. Frank realized that opening those grills wasn't that easy. In fact, they would need a special kind of tool. Whenever Frank got a chance to go outside, he would quietly drop the cement he had removed from the grill. Now, while working in the workshop, Frank cleverly made a small tool. He crafted it so that the grill could be cut. However, since Frank had to sneak it past the metal detector, he held a piece of iron in his hand. And when the security alarm went off, he handed that piece to the guard. Little did they know, the real tool was hidden in his shoes. As soon as he got back to his cell, after a bit of effort, he finally managed to cut through the grill and remove it. However, Frank knew that this alone wouldn't be enough. They needed more solid planning. The next day, they decided to make a fake head to trick the guard. For this, they divided the work among each other. John's job was to collect fake hair, while Charlie arranged for the paint, and Frank stole old newspapers from the library. That's all. As soon as the supplies were gathered, Frank mixed the newspaper with the cement protruding from the wall to create a human skull structure. They planned to deceive the guard by applying paint and hair on it. To further strengthen their plan, Charlie also made a fake grill using paint, which they would place when escaping. They would put the fake grills in place so that no one would notice the empty space. One night, Frank decided to go up alone, for which he placed a fake skull on the bed and climbed up through the pipeline via the grill. Upon reaching the top, he saw an iron door that was quite high up. Reaching there was difficult, and just then, a guard was on his round. When he reached Frank's cell, he got a little suspicious but thought it was Frank and quietly moved on. The next morning, Frank told everyone about the door, where John and Frank decided to go back in the darkness of the night. Soon it was night, and while all the prisoners were sleeping peacefully, Frank and John went back to the iron door once again. With each other's help, they reached the door. Now here, Frank realized that if they could find a tool, they could cut through this door. The next day, during music class, Charlie noticed an old fan. Seeing it, he thought they could use it as a tool. Now, how to get the fan out of the class? Charlie put it in an instrument box, and they easily got it past the guard. As soon as Frank got his hands on the fan, he immediately started turning it into a tool. That night, they went back to the iron door, and this time, with the help of their new tool, they started cutting through the door. Meanwhile, the guard heard some noises but ignored them. On the other hand, the path for these cunning prisoners was completely ready. After that, they decided to escape from the world's most secure prison on Tuesday night. Now, on Tuesday morning, during breakfast, Frank placed a flower on the table in Doc's memory. However, the warden saw all this from a distance and reminded Frank of the prison rules, squeezing and throwing away the flower. Mars went mad with anger at the warden's behavior. And just as he moved forward to attack the warden, he suddenly had a heart attack and fainted. That evening, the warden suddenly started searching Frank's cell. However, they didn't find anything there. After that, the warden told the guard to change Charlie and Frank's cell as soon as possible. Finally, the time had come for them to escape from this prison, where they had decided to meet near the gate. As night fell, they all got out of their cells and reached the gate. But at the last moment, Charlie got very nervous and backed out of the plan. Despite this, the rest managed to get past the door and reach the roof. Meanwhile, Charlie gathered his courage and quickly made his way through the pipeline to the iron door. But now Charlie couldn't reach the door alone. This meant he had missed his chance for freedom. On the other hand, avoiding the searchlights, Frank, John, and Clarence reached the prison wall. They secretly crossed the large gate and finally escaped from the world's most dangerous prison. After that, the three of them reached the shore in the prison. Using a stolen raincoat, they quickly started building a boat. After a lot of effort, they finally made one boat and set out into the sea to leave Alcatraz's borders forever. The next morning, when the guard tried to wake them from their beds, he was shocked to see a fake skull. He couldn't believe that 3 prisoners had successfully escaped from this prison. The alarm was sounded throughout the prison, and soon the search for the 3 began. The news spread across the country, and now the nation's Navy and Air Force were also involved in the search for these 3. Despite months of search and suppression, there was no trace of Frank, John, and Clarence. To save the prison's reputation, the warden spread the rumor that they drowned in the Pacific Ocean. But the truth was that the warden knew they had successfully escaped alive from this prison. After a year of investigation, the FBI also closed the case. And in this way, 3 genius prisoners escaped from the most secure prison. It became famous worldwide.